good morning, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Thanks for joining the Main Street webinar today on the Outdoor Heritage Fund. Today we're going to be hearing from Andrea from the Industrial Commission, who will tell us about the Outdoor Heritage Fund program. And then we'll also hear from Stephen from the Grant County Water Resource District, who will share some specific details about how his organization used this funding to complete a pretty cool project in their community. So I just started recording, just a quick heads up. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Andrea, who is going to take it from here.
Thanks, Emily. Well, I'd like to thank Emily and the Department of Commerce for giving me the opportunity to visit with all of you this morning about the Outdoor Heritage Fund. I think that once you hear about the program some more, you're going to see what an excellent resource this program is for North Dakota. Theodore Roosevelt said that the nation behaves well if it treats the natural resources as assets, which it must turn over to the next generation increased and not impaired in value. And I think that this program is really something that gets at what he is saying. What we're really trying to do is take a portion of funds from a finite resource, oil extraction taxes, and use it to make a lasting impact on the landscape so that future generations will also be able to benefit from this. So with that in mind, there are three areas that I'd like to visit with you about this morning. I want to just give you a really brief background about the program itself. I want to tell you a little bit about some of the policies of the program, and then I want to tell you what the program has done. So with that, let's talk about the background. The fund was established on August 1st of 2013 by the legislature. So it's a pretty new program, only about 6 years old. Currently, we have about $4.9 million available, and we have received an appropriation of $7.5 million per year for the next 2 years. So we're looking at $15 million for the biennium plus the 4.9 that we have, so about $20 million for the next 2 years. We have funds available for quality projects that'll make a difference in North Dakota. The Outdoor Heritage Fund has an advisory board that's appointed by the governor, and it's quite diverse. It consists of 12 voting members and 4 ex officio members. You can see that we have a broad background of expertise. We have 4 members from the agriculture community, 2 from energy, 4 from conservation, 1 from the business community, 1 from Parks and Rec, and then the ex officio members include Game and Fish, State Parks and Rec, State Forester, and then soil conservation districts are represented as well. The ex officio members serve as our technical committee as well. So what can you do with OHF funds? There are 4 directives established by the legislature that are really quite broad, and we call them A, B, C, and D, and I'm just going to walk you through those. Directive A is access to land, and so what we're trying to do there is provide access to private and public lands for sportsmen, including projects that create fish and wildlife habitat. Directive B includes agricultural stewardship. And what we're trying to do with this directive is improve, maintain, and restore water quality, soil conditions, plant diversity, animal systems, and other best management practices for agriculture. Directive C involves habitat restoration, and here we're trying to develop, enhance, conserve, and restore wildlife and fish habitat on both private and public lands. And you'll see that some of the directives overlap a little bit. And then finally, we have Directive D, which involves outdoor recreation areas. And the goal with this is to conserve natural areas for recreation through the establishment and development of parks and other recreation areas. So what the board is looking for in this directive is taking undeveloped areas and creating a recreational opportunity out of them, or else taking something that's already established and building on it and making it bigger and expanding it. In both cases, we really like to see a comprehensive conservation plan. So this is a long-term plan that shows what you want to do, how you want to do it, how long you think it's going to take, just those main guidelines. So those are the 4 directives. Who can apply? State agencies, political subdivisions, tribal entities, and nonprofits. You need to have a 25% match at a minimum. And then one thing I would say with that is that projects that have more match will be viewed more favorably by the board. And the match can be cash, in-kind, or indirect, and it can come from a variety of sources. So you can have federal, tribal, private sector funds. One thing to note is that one thing that the board does like to see is local buy-in. So the more local buy-in you have, the stronger your project will be. And then also, state general funds cannot be used for match unless it was legislatively appropriated. Now I'd like to walk you through the application process. So what will happen is you would submit your application. It'll be reviewed by the staff. And if we notice anything, if maybe something is missing or something doesn't match up, we'll let you know and you'll have an opportunity to correct it. And then the board will read it, and if they have questions, they'll let me know. And so sometimes the board will have questions for the technical committee about your application, but sometimes they'll want to know more directly from the applicant. And in those cases, I'll contact you and say, hey, I have this question from a board member. And I would strongly encourage you to use that opportunity to get back to me and provide more information about your project at that point, because it will go back to the board member that asked the question. Then the technical committee will review it from the standpoint of their area of expertise. So if you have a project involving tree planting, the state forester might say, you know, I'm concerned about the species they've selected for that region. That might not be a good fit. That type of feedback is the feedback that you would get. After all of that, the board will meet and the applicant has an opportunity to provide a 10-minute presentation. So this is really your chance to make your pitch to the board about your project. And I would encourage you to keep in mind that the board has already read your application. So if I had contacted you earlier and said, hey, I have a few board members that have questions, I would really take advantage of those 10 minutes to target your pitch around those areas that they had questions about. Then the board votes, and if the board votes in favor of your application, those recommendations go to the Industrial Commission for final approval. If the commission votes in favor, then we issue you the contract. So a few notes about scoring is that preference is given to projects that meet additional directives. So you can submit an application and maybe it only involves one directive, but if you have a project that involves several directives, it's going to be a stronger application. The other thing that I would point out is that the same number of points are awarded for each directive. So there's no directive that's favored. So for example, we're not specifically looking for Directive D projects or Directive B projects. They're all viewed equally. I had mentioned that if you have more match, you have more points. And then additional points for projects demonstrating sustainability, management of the project, and methods to measure success. So what this really means is, are you able to tell the board what you want to do, how you're going to do it, how much it's going to cost, how you're going to make sure that it's being done correctly and on time, and then how are you going to make sure that it's sustainable in the future after OHF funds have been spent. I'm not going to go in depth on ranking. The one thing I want to point out is that the advisory board can elect to recommend funding for the full amount, a partial amount, or no award. So in some cases, they might say, you know, I really like this project, but we don't really have an appetite for funding noxious weeds. We'd like to cut that portion out of the project. And so in that case, you can still do the noxious weeds. It's just that OHF funds couldn't be used for it. successful with the process, you'll be issued a contract, and we have sample contracts on our website that you can look at right now, just for your own information. The contract will outline what your deliverables will be, what your reporting requirements will be, and how the funds will be distributed. One thing to note is that this is a reimbursement-based program, so we provide funds based on the costs that are incurred. So you're going to need to be able to document those costs, and then you also need to be able to document your match. So those are some things that you should keep in mind as you're putting together your application, because if it's in the application, it becomes part of the scope of work of the contract. So what you say in your application, you're going to need to be able to verify. And then, excuse me, and then all reports will be posted on the Commission's website. We have a lot of resources on our website, and I would encourage you to go and take a look at it. There's also a list of funded projects, and so if you're looking for an example for an application, you could certainly go and look at some of the other projects that have been funded and use some of those applications as an example to base your own application off of. One thing I would caution you on with this, though, is that make sure you're looking at the most recently funded applications, because the board makeup has changed over time. And so if you pick a more recent application, you're going to have one that's more reflective of the current board.
Andrea, I have a question. Carol Peterson from Milner.
Hi, Carol.
Hi. Excuse me. The 10-minute where you can go before the board, is that something you could do over the phone potentially, on a speakerphone or something? Because we're quite a ways from Bismarck, so it's quite a long trip.
Yeah, that is a really good question. And at this time, we don't have that capability to do that. And one thing I should point out as well is that you don't have to make your presentation in order to be considered. So your application, if you're not able to come to the board meeting on that day, your application will still be considered and it will still be discussed by the board. But we don't have the conference call capability.
Good question, Carol. That was something that I wrote down as a question as well. Go ahead. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question as well. This is David Lundeen from the Wilson Downtowners.
Hi.
Hi. So if we were applying for a project that didn't necessarily, we weren't like conserving a current like agricultural space or like land, but we have a lot downtown that we're hoping to turn into a green space, essentially, would that be something that would qualify under this or no?
Would you be thinking of it as a recreational area?
Yes. Yep.
Yes, I think that would qualify. Would you have infrastructure or buildings involved?
Neighboring buildings. Basically, we have a burned out building downtown, and our goal is to kind of turn it into a green space, green park area, recreation area. But so much of what you're talking about is like, conserving things, and this isn't so much conserving as it is building a green space out of nothing. So I was just curious if that would be something that qualifies.
I think it could. We have done projects within the city of Fargo looking at green spaces. So I would recommend that you go on to the projects that we funded and look at some of those as examples.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
I have one question. Andrew, you mentioned that projects that can show local buy-in will strengthen the application. Can you give an example of maybe what the group would be looking for as a sign of local buy-in or support for the project?
Sure. So sometimes cities or counties will provide funds. Sometimes it's through labor, through their Parks and Rec, that they'll provide their match. And I want to be clear that the board understands that not every community is the same size, and some communities have more resources than others. So that's something that is kept in mind, just something to show that it's important to the community and they have a stake in it.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. So that's the background about the program, and I'm just going to go really briefly over a couple of rules about the program. The law says that we can't use OHF funds for litigation, lobbying, we can't purchase land, and we can't tie it up for 20 years or more. We can't interrupt mining activities or oil and gas activities. The projects obviously need to be located in North Dakota, and they have to be within the 4 directives, of course. And then we have some projects that will not receive consideration unless there's extenuating circumstances. And those are projects that have been completed already, or if you've already started them before you submit your application, feasibility or research studies, maintenance costs, paving projects, swimming pools, and personal property that's not affixed to the land. And then staffing or outside consultants. And so costs like engineering fees would be included with those outside consultant costs. And so if you are able to get an extenuating circumstance for costs, and I would point out that it's incumbent upon the applicant to provide the justification of why that extenuating circumstance is needed, then we cannot pay more than 5% of the grant if your grant is over $250,000, and we can't go over 10% of the grant if it's $250,000 or less for staffing and consultant fees. If your project involves building or infrastructure, it needs to be included in your comprehensive conservation plan. Otherwise, it's not going to be considered. And then if you're not directly involved in the execution of the project, you can't apply. So basically, it needs to be your own project. You can't apply for someone else. So those are just a few quick rules, and now I want to get to the good part, which is what the program has done so far. So since 2013, the Commission has awarded funding for 156 projects totaling over $46 million. That is a tremendous impact on the landscape of North Dakota that's going on right now. Over here, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but here in the pie chart, we have the funds awarded by directive. And you can see that 46% of the funds have gone to Directive B, which is the agricultural stewardship, and 22% has gone to Directive C, which is habitat, and tied at 16% are Directive A, which is access, and Directive D, which is recreation. So when I look at this chart, I see a big opportunity for Directive D to have more projects. Another way to look at the funds that have been awarded is by activity. And so this is just a bar graph that shows the awards. And then here we have awards by entity and awards by amount. And I really like this slide because I think that it shows the variability of this program. It shows just how much can be done. So you can see that 36% of the funds so far have gone to political subdivisions, 45% has gone to nonprofits, and over here, the awards by amount, half have gone to projects that are $1 million or more, but you also have other categories, and you'll see 3% is projects that are $50,000 or less. So I have seen in the same grant round a project that was less than $5,000 for planting trees at a park in a rural community in North Dakota be awarded funds, and I've also seen a project that's $3 million for agricultural stewardship. And so I just think it's really interesting and unique to this program that we can do so many diverse things. So I would say there's no project that is too small. If you have a project that would make an impact on your community, I hope that you'll submit an application and give this program a chance. And then here you'll see a map of awards by county. And so you see here, up in here, there's an opportunity. We haven't had as many applications from this area here as well. One thing I want to point out with this map is that statewide projects aren't included in these totals. So these are projects that are site specific to a certain county. This is great timing to have this call because we have an application deadline coming up on November 1st. So there's plenty of time to put together those applications and send them in. We also have deadlines in March, September, and May. If you have any questions, you can give Bob a call. He's our chairman. Or you can give me a call, even if you just want to say, hey, I have this idea and I'm not quite sure if it would be a good fit. Please give me a call. I'd be happy to visit with you about your project. And then I'm going to stop there and turn it over to the other speaker unless there's any other questions.
Thank you, Andrea.
Okay. I do. This is Becky Leonard from the City of St. John. And we're curious about previous applications that have been denied. Are those able to be modified and brought back for consideration?
That's a great question, Becky. Yes. So sometimes the board will say, you know, I have an interest in this project, but we would really like to see more information in this area. And so I would strongly encourage applicants to take that feedback, revise their application, and resubmit it. Just because you don't get it on the first shot doesn't mean that it's not a quality project. Certainly bring it back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good question, Becky. Any other questions for Andrea? Andrea, since we're only at 10:23, I'm wondering if you could maybe share a couple examples of some projects that have been funded with the Outdoor Heritage Fund.
Sure. Yep. I just didn't want to take time away from the other speaker. Okay. So here are just some examples of projects that have occurred in cities and counties. We have the Sunset Park Revitalization Project. And here I have the award number. If you want to go and look it up on our website, this might be helpful to you to find the application. What they were doing was purchasing playground equipment for their park, but really they were revitalizing that whole park. And so it was part of a multi-phase plan, and they made sure that they had all of those other phases included so the board could see that. Their total project cost was we'll call it $86,000. By law, when you have a playground project, we can only award up to $10,000. So that's why we were capped at $10,000 on this. But they had a lot of community partners, and so that project is underway right now. We also have the Little Missouri Recreation Area, and this is a project that we just funded in our most recent grant round. So this one is just getting started. It's by the Dunn County Park Board, and what they're doing is developing a campground by the Little Missouri. And so they'll add 30 RV campsites, 4 tent sites. They're going to have a picnic area and non-motorized trails. And so this project is going to cost $214,000, and we are paying $85,600 of it, and the Dunn County Parks Department is putting in $128,000. So they really have a lot of community buy-in with this project. This is another type of project. This was also recently funded in the most recent grant round. Main Street to Stanley City Pond Shared Use Pathway. So their directive was actually not recreation. It was access. And so what they were trying to do was construct a pathway that provides access from Main Street out to their recreational area that they have. The total project cost is $224,000, we'll call it $225,000. We're paying $88,650. And so the city of Stanley came in with match, and then the Boy Scout troop there is also providing some in-kind work as well. And then we have Cannonball Trail. This is also a new one. And so this is Mott Visionary Committee. So this is not the city itself. It's a community group, so it would qualify as a nonprofit. and they are constructing a 1.5-mile long rustic trail along their riverbanks. So it's not going to be paved, it's just going to be a native trail. And it's going to cost $22,000, and we're going to pay $10,000 of that. And they also have a lot of community efforts underway for the match. Oops. And that's my examples.
Thank you, Andrea. Those are great examples. It's really helpful to see concrete examples of how this fund can be used in communities.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. It's really an honor and very exciting. North Dakota Outdoor Heritage Fund was very instrumental in developing handicap accessible features in both Rowley Dam recreation areas and Sheep Creek Dam recreation area in Grant County of North Dakota. I was hearing about the Outdoor Heritage Fund funding and through the news over the course of a year or two, and that was kind of the spark to research it further. And talking to the community and the recreation users, I should describe myself. I call myself retired. That means I hibernate in the wintertime. During the summer, I'm caretaker for Rowley and Sheep Creek Dams, and I've got a background in landscape horticulture and was a recreation manager at Lake Chida. So I have some background experience in this. So Outdoor Heritage Fund, we put in 2015, we put together a grant for handicap accessible fishing pier, which recreational users really said they needed a more accessible pier. The old one we have is down a steep hill, and it's not convenient for anybody that even has limitations in walking. If you can go to the second slide, Grant County Water Resource District, just a quick description there. It's a county entity under the county commissioners. It manages the public water resources, water quality, and also manages Sheep Creek and Rowley dams. Sheep Creek and Rowley are owned by and established by the North Dakota Game and Fish Department. I started talking about putting the ideas together, primarily talking to recreation users, and then of course the board of the water district, and then other public, and I'm involved with Elgin Lions Club, so talking with them, and started getting an idea and a feel of what's possible. The Outdoor Heritage Fund, as I said, was the inspiration, and getting grants through them inspired to continue the project. We also had funding, of course, through the Water Resource District, and then the Grant County Road Department provided gravel and rock and things that we also needed, and that was a donation through their department. Overall, we've gone through 4 years of 4 phases of our accessibility projects, and I'll cover that. We've got 2 grants through the Outdoor Heritage Fund in 2015-16 for about $60,000 total. Our total grants through Game and Fish and donations through local entities was about $94,000, and counting labor and equipment donations, as well as some that was paid. Our total project cost to date is about $140,000. Next slide, please.
There we go.
Okay, I'm back. This next slide says proposed accessible fishing pier. This is a copy of what I included in our very first grant application to the Heritage Fund. At the very, it shows the example of the type of dock, the fishing pier that we wanted, an accessible use and use by children. The paragraph at the bottom of the demographics of Grand County is quite an aging population. Our average age is 55, so the half of our population of the county is or will have accessibility issues, even simply walking, and as well also children's fishing, children's recreation, having the accessible pier and the railings makes it convenient to take family out for fishing. Next slide, please. This is Lake Chida boat ramp parking pad. We put this together when I was working there, and that was kind of the inspiration on how to do a project to have parking access. And we put a picnic table rather than the bench, and then it was connected to the accessible fishing pier. Next slide. A big part of this entire project over this multiple years is Lions International is celebrating their 100th anniversary, and from 2015 through 17, Lions International promoted local clubs to develop what they called Centennial Community Legacy Projects. So the Elgin Lions got actively involved with this, and that's part of the local support, of the Elgin Lions over the course of the 3 years donated a total of $10,000 towards accessibility projects. The second picture is we have an annual kids fishing day and developing the accessible fishing pier, and then last year we connected it with a vault toilet, and that significantly improved our kids fishing day for facilities. Next slide. I'm going to cover a little bit of the 2015, just showing pictures of the dirt work and site prep for concrete. Next one. I don't hear anything from Emily, so I don't know if you're
Sorry about
on
that.
the same.
We're on 2015
same slide
phase
or not.
1.
Okay, this one would show a picture of one of the trees we planted. That tree now is over 30 feet tall, being close to the water. They get their roots into moisture. And then assembling, this is a floating fishing pier. We have to pull it out of the water every fall and put it back in the spring. And then it shows how the concrete parking pad, accessible, van accessible, as well as a picnic table, and then the fishing pier. And they're hoping, they haven't promoted it to our local nursing homes and care centers, and there's at least one in each town in this area, hoping that they'll take a van out and have a picnic and do a little fishing or getting some fresh air. That would be really a high point in the use of these accessible features. The next one is the last picture of the 2015. This is a slide that I included in the Outdoor Heritage Fund final report, showing this first phase of the project. Next slide, it says 2016 phase 2. Again, we got an Outdoor Heritage Fund grant for about $40,000. This was concrete camping pads as well as concrete installed around. We also added charcoal grills and fire rings that are also accessible. The Heritage Fund in both grants helped pay for tree planting, both small and large trees. We put in 400 or 500 soil conservation trees and over the 2 years, and 20 of the larger trees, which now after several years are making a significant impact in the looks of the campgrounds. As you can see to the lower left, we have a water hydrant that's accessible with concrete and brick around it. The accessible pads are primarily used by able-bodied people, but even people that are getting older that have more difficulty walking is very useful, user-friendly. This picnic tables already existed, or the picnic shelters, and then the accessible features, they get actively used basically every weekend. They're being used. And then there's one that we did, accessible parking pad, camping pad, and grills at Raleigh Dam with this one. Next slide, it says 2017 Phase 3. This was at Raleigh Dam, and it was about a $5,000 grant from North Dakota Game and Fish. We did accessible parking pad and picnic table, and then that'll be connected to a fishing pier that we already had at that location. Next slide. 2018, last year, this was a very significant project. This is North Dakota Game and Fish, and we got a grant from North Dakota Game and Fish for $8,500 to install 3 accessible, handicap accessible concrete vault toilets, 2 at Sheep Creek and 1 at Raleigh Dam, and each of these are attached to the other accessible projects that we've done in previous years. The next slide. The one is connected to the accessible fishing pier at Sheep Creek. Second picture is vault toilet is connected with a sidewalk to the accessible camping pad. And the third one is the most difficult and the most interesting. At Raleigh Dam, the fishing pier is off of a hillside, so North Dakota Water Commission or Health Department requires the vault toilet be 100 feet away from the water. Doesn't matter that it's going 8 feet up a hill. Well, to have accessible sidewalks at the 1 inch to 1 foot slope with a level resting pad every 20 to 30 feet, ended up having to do this zigzag sidewalk, which was a significant amount of work, dirt work and such. Now, our Grant County Water District paid for these sidewalks, and then the gravel and fill and such was from the county road department. Then the next slide is 2020 project. We need to add handrails to this zigzag project, the zigzag sidewalk, and that's going to be a significant amount of money. Probably be paid by the water district, but we might be able to get some funding through the Lions, or in Raleigh, the Raleigh Gun Club is also donated towards these projects. As you can see, we did dirt work and got the grass seeded, so it's turned out very well. Then the last picture just shows the part of the use of the handicap accessible fishing pier. This is Elgin Lions annual Kids Fishing Day. And this past year of June 19, we had 21 kids and about 8 or 9 parents and half a dozen lions. And we have grilled hot dogs and picnics, and kids are absolutely thrilled. They're laughing and joking and running around, and kind of have to be careful with keeping them far enough apart that the danger, the local game warden is there and stressing hook safety. And then, of course, the parents and the other lions are basically a one-on-one supervision on not getting the hooks into somebody else. So again, I want to stress that the Outdoor Heritage Fund was instrumental in the start of this, and then the progression through the period of, it's going to be 5 years on developing accessible projects. So that covers the Directive A, providing access, as well as Directive D, which is conserving natural resources and establishing the development of parks and recreation areas. So a lot going on, and I want to thank Outdoor Heritage Fund for getting it started. That's all I have. I'll certainly answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Stephen. This is a really cool project, and it's cool to see all of the different phases that the community went through, as well as all of the sources of funding that you were able to find and use. I've got a couple of questions, but before I jump in, I want to open it up and ask if anyone else has a question about this project.
This is Andrea. I don't have a question. I have a compliment. I would say that this is a great example. The application is a great example if you're looking for one to go back and look at. I would look this one up. They did a really nice job in their writing. And also, you know, we had talked about extenuating circumstances, and so there are times when things like paving, parking lots and things are justified, and accessibility would be one issue that you could certainly include in your application.
Thanks for pointing that out, Andrea.
A comment I'd like to make on the grant writing application. I've done grant writing for a lot of years through my different employment. I was one thing that's really stressed, and it was complemented by the committee at the review, is that you have details in your budget and specifics, and then if you get a price quote from a contractor or a concrete company or park supply, give your reference on where that money comes from. You don't want to just pull a dollar bill amount out of your head and say this is our budget. The more detailed line items, and then Outdoor Heritage Fund wouldn't pay for picnic tables because they're not attached to the ground, so they could go to the line items in the budget and subtract the exact amount that was budgeted for picnic tables, and rather than discard the entire project or just take them guessing on a dollar bill amount, it's really convenient to the review process to have a very detailed budget. Okay.
Thanks for sharing that insight, Stephen. Any other questions for Stephen? So, Stephen, one question that I have, during the process of putting together the application for the Outdoor Heritage Fund, and then I'm curious, one, if there was any back and forth between you, your organization, and the committee, and if there was any difference between the initial project that you proposed and the completed project. So if they suggested any changes or asked questions that made you and your team kind of rethink parts of what you were doing.
Okay, the first grant application in 2015 was for the accessible fishing pier and the parking pad, accessible pad and picnic table, as well as some planting trees. And there was no changes, nothing we had to revise. That went accepted as it was written. The first grant application that we sent in 2016, as I was talking about, the budget included within the grant. Over in the questioning during the 10-minute presentation, they asked about picnic tables, and then when the approval process came through, they subtracted, I forget the exact amount, it was like $2,000 or $3,000 from my grant application, or our grant application. So we received, the second, in 2016, we received less money than we asked for because of the stipulation of that they're not paying for, it says personal property that is not affixed to the land. It paid for fire rings that were pounded into the ground, but they wouldn't pay for picnic tables that are movable. So that was the only changes within the two grant applications.
Excellent, thank you. One other question. When you started this process, started having conversations with community members and coming up with this idea, did you have in mind all of the different phases and all of the different pieces of this project that you would pursue? Or did you kind of add on year after year as you progressed through the project?
The very initial idea and thought was for the fishing pier and the parking pad. But then it started to progress when the Elgin Lions and Lions International had the 3-year community legacy project. So that kind of sparked the thought of doing more. And then once Outdoor Heritage Fund had approved adding the accessible camping pads and around, concrete around fire rings and such, then the board members were saying, well, wouldn't it be nice to have the vault toilets connected to all these accessible features? So it was sort of a growth process and kind of a natural progression. In the 2014, when we were first talking about it, it was doing the first part of it, and then it grew, and now we're just about finished in our accessibility features, which we can proudly say are some of the best in the state. And they're very actively used. And what I've found out through my years of experience with public recreation is accessibility is ever since about 2012 or so, about 2002, when the federal government passed the ADA laws, Americans with Disability Act. This accessibility, the curb cuts and the sidewalks, access into doors and restrooms, it's been a real priority for the entire nation. And as I get older, I can really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
it's something to consider with the green space and the parks and all of the other projects that people on this webinar are considering. They should also consider accessibility as part of their overall design.
I think that's a really good point. And I think projects like this could fit into a lot of different community priorities related to adding amenities and improving quality of life locally. And I'm really glad that you pointed out the accessibility piece, because it's not enough to just have really cool things in our community. We also have to make sure that people of all ages, backgrounds, and abilities are able to enjoy them. And that's part of why I think this is such a cool project.